Recently, I've been very interested in upcycling or repurposing things that I would normally throw away and turning them into beautiful pieces of home decor that sometimes can also be functional. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Jess and I love to make home decor on a budget. And if you do too, then let's get started. I'm sure at one time or another you've probably received something in the mail that came in a cylinder-shaped package, just like this BrewMate cardboard tube that I got with the last mug that I bought from them. The cardboard is really sturdy because it's meant to help protect the cup, so I knew it would make for a great DIY. I started by taking the lid off and cutting the little excess piece that came off of the top just to make the top of the longer part more even. And I'm actually going to use the tall part and the small part for this project. I am going to be covering both of these pieces, but I wanted to give them a quick coat of paint just to make sure that the pattern on the lid and the graphics on the big part of the container wouldn't show through what I was going to use to cover them up with. Once my paint had dried, I grabbed one of these pieces of removable wallpaper from the Dollar Tree, and you can see this size is 16 by 11. And I really love the pattern on this one. This pattern is kind of new to me. I've seen the removable wallpaper for a while in my Dollar Tree, but I haven't seen this pattern. So I peeled off the main part of the wallpaper backing and I used the smaller strip of backing as a guide so that I could lay it straight onto my container. And then because the container was round, it made it easy just to roll the wallpaper right onto the container. A few alternatives to what I'm using here. If you can't find a cylinder-shaped container, if you haven't received one in the mail, they do sell containers similar to this at the Dollar Tree that I think are meant to give wine bottles as a gift. And if you can't find the removable wallpaper, you could also use contact paper or even scrapbook paper too. There was a little too much overhang on the one side, so I did cut off some of the excess. I would say I left about 1.5 inches of overhang from the side of the container to the end of the wallpaper. To create a smooth edge on both sides of the container, I started by cutting slits into the wallpaper. I started by cutting the slits, I would say about 1 inch wide, and then after I started cutting, I realized I could have just used the width of the pattern on the wallpaper, but it really didn't matter because you can't tell anyway. But you can see here, once I have all my flaps cut, then I'm able to just push them down and that creates a nice smooth edge. And I did that on the bottom and then I repeated that process on the top. And I just folded the flaps right into the center of the container just to make the edges look nice and polished. I really liked the pattern of this wallpaper, so I didn't want to add too much embellishments, but I did think it needed a little something towards the bottom. I found this metal trim at the Dollar Tree a while ago, and I thought it would go perfect on this container. So I started in the back where the wallpaper met, where it kind of created a seam. And it was really cool, this metal trim. I didn't even have to try to cut it. I just bent it back and forth a few times and it broke off. So I lined the metal trim up with the seam on the back of the container, and then I used a little hot glue to keep it in place. And I only put hot glue in the back because I didn't want the hot glue to seep through the metal trim and you'd be able to see it. And once I had the other end hot glued on, I did hold it there for a while and I made sure that hot glue was really set before I let go because this metal trim is kind of springy and if I let go too soon it would have just popped off. The last thing I did to finish off this container was I took a few of these black wooden beads that I already had in my stash and I glued 3 of them on the bottom, sort of in a triangle shape to act as feet that would elevate this container just a bit. I found this really cool ribbon at the Dollar Tree. It kind of looks like birch tree bark, and I knew it would be perfect for covering up the smaller part of my container. So I just took a regular glue stick and I covered the whole outside of the lid of the container with the glue stick because this ribbon is not really a material, it's more like a paper ribbon, so I knew the glue stick would work well to adhere the ribbon onto the container. Now it was just barely wide enough to fit around this container, but I did manage to make it work, and I tried to make sure that I had enough space on the bottom and the top so that I could repeat the same process that I did with the larger part of the container. I just cut slits into it, and then I folded all the little flaps down to cover both of the edges. I decided to add one embellishment to this container also. I've been seeing a lot in home decor trends where containers have just a single leather handle kind of draped to the side. So I decided to take some of this faux leather ribbon that I had got at the Dollar Tree, and I just created one handle that draped over the side of this container. And then to finish it off, I took two small buttons and I glued them on top of the ends of the ribbon to make it look like it had been buttoned onto the container. I didn't film it, but I did add 3 of those black wooden beads to the bottom of this container also. And I decided to finish off both my containers by adding just a little bit of filler and some faux plants. I do want to mention that today's video is part of a collab called Salvage Saturday, hosted by my friend Teresa at Teresa B DIY. This collab's also co-hosted by Jamie at Simple Roots Simple Living. And the other ladies in this collab are Emily at Farm Charm Chic and Sandra at DIYs at the Schwoven's Nest. Everyone is doing projects where they're repurposing or reusing things that are broken or things that you might want to throw away. So make sure when you're done with this video, you head down to the description box and there'll be a playlist where you can check out everyone's videos. I'm so excited to see what projects everyone came up with because everyone in this group is so awesome and so talented, and I'm so excited to be part of this collab. And if you came here from the playlist, like I mentioned before, my name's Jess, and thanks for checking out my video. If you like to online shop like I do, then you probably have a few of these babies laying around your house too. I do send my boxes to be recycled, but every once in a while I like to take one and turn it into a pretty storage box. I wanted this box to be pretty sturdy, so I started by taking the flaps of the box and I'm just mitering the corners, and all that means is that I'm cutting a small pie-shaped piece off of each end of the flap so that when I fold it inside, it will leave out any of the bulk that's created from the square flap. And then that way, whenever I use some hot glue to hot glue these flaps into the box, it'll make the walls of the box be more sturdy. I wanted to cover part of this box with some material, but I needed a straight line so that I would know where to glue my material down. So I just used my ruler and I measured from the top of the box down, and I created a line the entire way around the box. I wanted there to be a finished edge on my material, so instead of gluing it down from the top of the box, I'm gluing it in the opposite direction. As you can see here, I'm putting the material down from that line, and I hot glued it the whole way around, and that's why it was important to have that line there so that I would have a guide to make sure that I was getting the material even around the whole way around the box. And like I said, the material right now is being glued downward, but I'm going to flip it upwards into the box to give it a nice finished edge. Now this material that I'm using, I think it's like an upholstery material. I got it at Joann Fabrics. It was in their little remnant bin that they have on clearance. So this material is pretty thick. So if you're using a thinner material, you may want to paint your box first just to make sure that any logos or anything on your box doesn't show through your material. But like I said, this material is pretty thick, so I wasn't worried about seeing the, US Postal Service through my material. Okay, now I have everything glued into place. So since my material was facing downward, now I'm going to start flipping it over so that it will tuck inside the box. And that's what I meant before. It was kind of hard to explain, but you can see here now as I'm pulling the material up over so that I can tuck it inside, it gave me a nice finished edge where that line was that I had drawn with my pencil. I cut off some of the excess length from the material, and then I was able to tuck it down inside. And I used my ruler as I was cutting around. I didn't need it to be exact, but I just wanted to get rid of some of the extra material so it wasn't too bulky when I tucked it down inside. To cover up the bottom of my box, you can see here I have a pretty big bin of this white nautical rope from the Dollar Tree. So I decided to use that, and I started in the back where the two edges of the material met, and I just started hot gluing the rope, and I made sure that as I got to each row that I was really pushing the rope together so that you couldn't see any of the box through the rows of the rope or in between the rope and the material. I also tried to make sure that when I came to the end of a piece of rope that it was in the center of one of the sides of the box. I tried to keep one of the sides where there were no raw edges showing, but you can see on this side I came to the end of my rope, so I only glued to the center of this side of the box, and then I cut off the excess so that I could add the next piece onto it. And the reason I did that is because I wasn't worried about the back side, because I knew you probably wouldn't see that, and then on the sides of the box I'm going to cover that up with something else anyway. So I just wanted to make sure that those raw edges weren't showing on the front of the box. To make sure that my material didn't slide around, I ran a bead of hot glue along the inside of the top of the box so that when I tucked the material down in, it would stay in place and it wouldn't bunch up at the top of the box. I also wasn't sure what I was going to store in this box, so I wanted to make sure that you couldn't see the bottom of the box. So I took two pieces of foam core board and hot glued those together, and then I just covered them in the same material and slid it down on the bottom of the box. I didn't bother gluing it in place or anything. It was just to make sure that you didn't see that raw cardboard from the top. Even if you don't have a cutting machine like a Cricut or a Silhouette, make sure you keep your eye out at the Dollar Tree for this faux leather that they're selling in rolls that can be used on those types of machines. But you can also use them for a lot of different cute embellishments that you can just cut out by hand. I wanted to create two leather bands to go around each side of my box. So I started by laying out my piece of black leather, and I cut two strips that were 3.5 inches wide. Since this leather is on the thinner side, I didn't want the hot glue to create a ridge on the edges. So I'm using some double-sided tape here, and it stuck really well. And I just ran a line of the double-sided tape along one edge of the leather, and then I was able to just fold that edge over so it created a nice polished edge on the leather so you wouldn't see where I had cut it. And I repeated that on both sides. Now this double-sided tape that I'm using is 3/8 of an inch wide, and I do get this from Amazon. It's called Scor Tape. I always have it linked in the description box, but I know they do sell different widths of double-sided tape at the Dollar Tree also, and I haven't tried those out myself, but I'm assuming that they would work just as well for something like this. After I had both of my leather bands created, I added some hot glue to one end of one of the bands, and I hot glued it into the bottom of the box. And then to make sure that I didn't see any of the hot glue through that band, I added another bead of hot glue towards the top of the inside of the box, and I pulled it fairly tight over so that it would have a nice clean line running down the side of the box. And then I ran just another bead of hot glue towards the bottom of the box where I was covering over the rope, and then I glued the whole band to the bottom of the box. Once I had both of my bands in place, then I took that piece of foam core board that I had covered with the same material and I just slipped it into the bottom. I have one more project for you today, but if you like this video so far, make sure you give it a big thumbs up, and if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed. And if you're on social media, I am on Instagram at gluelalacrafts. I had this wicker hamper that started to fall apart a few months ago, and it had this muslin type of material as a liner on the inside of it. So once the hamper completely fell apart, I decided to hold on to the liner that was on the inside because I knew I could probably use it for something else. So I started by just clipping a little piece off of the top, and then I started ripping down the seams. And this material is really easy to just rip, and I thought it would make really cool looking tassels. So I started by taking my scissors and I just snipped about a ½ inch from one end, and then I would just continue ripping it down the length of the bag. And obviously not everyone's going to have a hamper liner lying around, but you could use any type of material for this. I just really liked the neutral color of this liner, and I think you can get muslin material at Joann's fairly cheap. So even if you don't have some kind of material that you want to use, you could just go search that remnant bin that they always have there. There's usually some pretty good deals in there on other types of material. Once I had several strips tore, I added a few together till I liked the thickness of them, and because my strips were fairly long, I folded them in half and then I folded them in half again. And you can see here, I just kind of folded them over a skewer stick because the strips were a little bit bulky to work with. I wanted to make sure that I had something that I could slide another piece through. So I took one extra strip and I tied it towards the top there. And this is just, you know, creating a simple tassel, kind of the same way that you would use like jute twine or yarn to create a tassel. I'm just using strips of material instead. And then that skewer stick really came in handy because I needed to be able to pull either a string or another piece of material through. So what I ended up doing was I took another one of the strips of the material and I just scotch taped it to that stick, and then I was able to pull it right through the center of the loops there. I created 5 tassels all together, and I think I forgot to mention it, but I am going to be adding these tassels to a wood bead garland. I wanted to add a touch of color to each of the tassels, so I took some of this greenery from the Dollar Tree, and you can see this one here. It's just some cute little leaves with a piece of some kind of plant. I don't know. Is it lavender? Is it lilac? I don't know. But I just really like the purple color of it. So I just cut one of the stems off of the bunch, and then I tucked it up under the band of each of the tassels. When I'm stringing together wood beads, I always like to double up my jute twine, and I always add a dab of hot glue to the two ends, and I sort of roll them together, and it almost creates like a needle and makes it easier to put the beads on the twine. I had these gray wooden beads already in my stash. I actually got these on clearance after Christmas at Walmart. They were already a garland that was strung together, but of course I unstrung them so that I could create more garlands out of one garland. And this is where I said that having that piece of material through the loops of the top of the tassel came in handy, because after I had all of the beads on the jute string that I wanted, I did 7, I think, in between each tassel. All I did was wrap that piece of material around my jute string, and then it was able to guide it right through the center of the loops of the top of the tassel. Now, of course, like I said, I put about 7 beads in between each tassel, but you could put as many beads as you want in between each tassel, or you wouldn't even have to use beads. You could even just string nautical rope through each of the tassels, and I think that would create a really cute garland also. Thanks for hanging out in the craft room with me today. Make sure you check out the playlist for the Salvage Saturday collab. I have it linked in the description box below. And if you're coming here from the playlist, leave a comment and introduce yourself. I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.